The Professional Golfers Association of America presents The Complete History of Golf. Volume 1, Let the Game Begin. Every time a golfer steps to the tee, a continuity is born. A shared experience with all those who have ever picked up a club and the generations of golfers yet to come. For that one timeless moment, all life is encapsulated in a single swing. All life in a pursuit of excellence that has spanned the centuries.
Hi, I'm Pat Summerall. A good walk spoiled. That was Mark Twain's definition of golf. Yet millions throughout the world might disagree with him. We began our history of golf with an event that could be considered a microcosm of the sport itself. This is the Crooked Stick Golf Club in Carmel, Indiana. For 4 days, these long sculptured greens were the battlefield for one of sport's major events, the 1991 PGA Championship. The 73rd championship of the Professional Golfers Association brought together some of the greatest talents in modern golf.
Familiar faces such as Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer, as well as new champions like Ian Baker Finch, Payne Stewart, and Ian Woosnam. This is golf in the 90s. Thousands of fans brave torrential rains and stifling heat to pay tribute to their favorite professionals. They wear their devotion to this unique sport on their clothing and on their emotions. Millions more share the excitement through the electronic magic of radio and television. This simple game has become a phenomenon which influences our culture and our vocabulary, an international language of excellence that has been spread to all corners of the globe.
But golf wasn't always such a popular sport. Golf pros were not always treated with respect, much less admiration. The evolution of golf has been a dynamic and fitful voyage through 6 centuries. I invite you to join me as we travel back through the years in the complete history of golf.
One thing that sets golf apart from other organized sports is its impressive age. Before Christopher Columbus was even born, golf had become an obsession in Scotland. Before the first printing press was introduced to Europe, artisans understood the basic physics of the play club. While most of the world still believed the Earth was the center of the universe, a few golf courses were already a century old. How exactly did golf begin? Was the idea of striking a ball into a hole the brainstorm of some bored and lonely shepherd? Documentation from the royal court proved that golf was being played in Scotland more than 500 years ago. Yet locals insist golf was played in St. Andrews centuries before the university opened in 1411. This golfing figure on a stained glass window in the Gloucester Cathedral was crafted during the 1300s. The Dutch, Flemish, French, Chinese, Japanese, and ancient Romans have laid claim to originating the sport, and passions still run high. As far back as 1100 AD, the Romans took time out from their daily pillaging to play paganica, or game of the countryman. Paganica involves striking a feather-filled ball with a curved stick. Is it possible these primitive players were the Sam Sneads and Arnold Palmers of their times? Other possible antecedents of golf include jeu de maille, played mainly by French aristocrats. And the Flemish Cole, which took the game out of the courtyards into the open land itself. Cole was played with mallets as well as clubs, and the object was to strike the ball against a door or other target. Cole also allowed an opponent to hit your ball if you came too close to the target. The Dutch game of het kolven was played with a kalf, or club similar to our modern implements. Kolven is well documented by the flourishing Dutch masters of the 16th and 17th centuries. The game was played on ice or in a walled courtyard. As such, it bears more similarity to hockey or croquet than modern golf. Whatever its roots, golf as we know it today evolved in the harsh climate of eastern Scotland. In fact, the term links is derived from Linksland, the sandy cratered ground formed through centuries of relentless ocean assault. In Scotland, the many unique aspects of golf were joined. The wide open countryside, solitary competition where only nature was allowed to interfere with the lie of your ball, and the goal of dropping the ball into a hole in the least number of strokes. Golf was in play before most people could read or write. One of the earliest written records of golf was, oddly enough, a decree proclaiming the sport illegal. Medieval Scotland was in a state of almost continuous war with the armies of England, and the principal weapon of war was the longbow. The Scottish King James II believed the only way to defend the country was to keep his bowmen highly proficient. Unfortunately, many of his soldiers became so obsessed with golf, they spent less time on the archery fields than on the links. The sport had become a threat to national security. So in 1457, the game of golf was given a death sentence by the King of Scotland. Yet golf, that most subversive of sports, continued to grow in popularity. Early players were willing to risk the royal wrath in order to put the wee ball into the hole. And what happened to James II? Well, he realized that the days of the bow and arrow were numbered, so he dedicated himself to the new weapons of war. In the siege of Roxburgh, James became too curious about the firing of a cannon and was killed when it suddenly exploded. And so ended the life of the royal enemy of golf. Meanwhile, the Church of Scotland, realizing that golf would probably not be wiped out, convinced Parliament to impose penalties on anyone caught playing on their day of worship. And to this day, certain courses, such as St. Andrews, still prohibit Sunday golf, except in certain circumstances. In 1488, a group of noblemen invited the current Scottish king, James IV, to try his hand at the outlawed game. James confidently grabbed a club, swung with all his royal might, and watched the ball dribble far short of every other player. He was hooked. In violation of his grandfather's laws, he took up the game. The royal hobby soon became the rage as Europe passed from medieval to modern times. Golf historians claim the first female player was Mary Stuart, more commonly known as Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary introduced golf to the continent while studying at the French University. She may even have coined the word caddy by calling the students who toted her bags cadets, the French word for son. Legend holds that shortly after her second husband was murdered, Mary consoled herself by playing at St. Andrews. She thus goes down in history as the first official golf widow. Mary was later executed for being an alleged conspirator in a plot to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I of England, who was not a golfer. But Mary would have her revenge because Elizabeth remained the Virgin Queen. Mary's son James succeeded to both the English and Scottish thrones and established Britain's Stuart dynasty. James brought golf to his new kingdom by constructing a 7-hole course at Blackheath. He even appointed royal club and ball makers to reduce the trade deficit with Holland, which had been supplying Scotland with golf balls. With royal encouragement, it wasn't long before golf spread throughout the British Isles. Golf was active back when Middle English was still in use. As the language evolved, so would the sport. Because golf had come to be played on courses of all shapes and sizes, controversies were bound to erupt. If golf was to continue to grow, it would need to be organized. One of the oldest and most fashionable courses was the Links of Leith, near Edinburgh. The links originally had 5 holes and later expanded to 7. In fact, Charles I of England was at Leith when he first received word of the Irish insurrection of 1641.
Rumor has it he neglected to hold out.
8 years earlier, Charles had issued a royal proclamation in which players involved in the previously illegal sport of golf were not to be molested in their lawful recreation. In 1744, the town of Edinburgh decided to hold an annual tournament. The winner was to be awarded a silver club and designated the captain of golf, the final arbiter of all golfing disputes. Having expected golfers from all over the kingdom, the Edinburgh organizers realized that they better draw up a set of rules, and these became the first standardized rules for the sport. Although the tournament was open to all noblemen, gentlemen, or other golfers, only 10 competed. John Rattray, a local surgeon, sliced through the competition to become the first winner in 1744. Thus, the Honourable Company of Edinburgh Golfers was born, making it the first official golf organization in existence. Ten years after the Honourable Company of Edinburgh Golfers, the Society of St. Andrews Golfers, 33 miles to the north, offered a similar silver club in a tournament won by local merchant William Landale. The old course of St. Andrews, which was already hundreds of years old, originally had 12 holes. The typical round of golf was 22 holes of play, 11 out, the last 10 back in, then 1 extra hole close to the starting point. It wasn't until 1764 that the physical holes were combined and the number of playing holes reduced to 18. Since the society slowly assumed the role of setting golf standards from the deteriorating Links of Leith and the Honourable Company, 18 holes of golf came to be the standard, although it took nearly 75 years before the 18-hole round was accepted by all courses. Mr. J.H. Taylor, who won the British Open at St. Andrews in 1895.
When I saw a dullish, flat course as St. Andrews was, I was very disappointed at my first sight of it. But seeing that I've won 2 of my championships there, I have a very great affection for St. Andrews Links.
Because St. Andrews and Leith were public courses, the links were shared by townsfolk and livestock. Bright red jackets helped to warn bystanders of approaching golfers and errant shots. This distinctive dress quickly became a sign of status and privilege. As the American colonies were preparing to detach from the British Empire, private golfing societies quickly spread throughout the land. When the Honourable Company temporarily suspended operations in 1831, the Society of St. Andrews Golfers became the oldest continuing golf organization in the world. St. Andrews was recognized as the final authority for the entire sport. Like any exclusive society, initiation rites were shrouded in ceremony, such as kissing the silver club, inscribed balls representing former captains of the society, and the cannon salute each time a captain plays himself in. When King William IV was granted membership in 1834, an official proclamation changed the society's name to the Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St. Andrews. This stone clubhouse, built in 1854, has since become the spiritual home of golf.
Over the years at St. Andrews, everyone's been there. You walk down a fairway and you say Harry Varden walked down here, James Braid walked down here. and even going further back, Tom Morris Jr., Tom Morris Sr., the Parks, Andersons, J.H. Taylor, you know, and right through, all the way through Bobby Jones, who hated it the first time he saw it and then grew to love it and said, if ever I have to choose one course to play for the rest of my life, it would be here at the Old Course, where conditions vary from not just day to day, but hour to hour. It is a marvelous, marvelous shrine for golf.
The history of golf represents the continuing search for the perfect swing. Here are three champions of their time. After centuries as a mild diversion and obsessive pastime, golf in the 1800s had become big business, and nowhere more so than St. Andrews. Prior to that time, ball and club makers had to supplement their income as cobblers, blacksmiths, or arms manufacturers. The first professionals were actually caddies, colorful characters known as much for their drinking and outlandish tales as for their skill on the green. The first true golf professional was Alan Robertson. Robertson was a legend in his own time, easily able to defeat the best in the land, yet shrewd enough to make it look harder than it was. Along with the wagers and big money purses, Robertson earned his living as a skilled ball maker, whose featheries were in great demand. He is also said to have innovated a number of club designs. Robertson's apprentice at St. Andrews was a mailman's son named Tom Morris, who would himself become one of golf's great pioneers. In 1849, Robertson and Morris teamed up to win a match against the Dunn brothers, Willie and Jamie, for a purse of 400 pounds, the equivalent of more than $17,000 today. Yet Alan Robertson was to have a falling out with his talented apprentice over an invention which was to change the game of golf forever, the gutty ball. In its earliest form, golf might have been played by a few lone shepherds, hitting stones with their crooked staffs.
For a short time, there were balls that were made of various things, even a Cambuca ball that was made of a boxroot tree, similar to our balsa wood today, but it didn't fly, and it would split and pieces would fly out of it.
The sport took a tremendous leap forward with the introduction of the Feathery. Like the pouch used in the Roman game Paganica, the Feathery was a small leather ball packed with goose feathers. An expert craftsman would cut 3 pieces of leather and sew them together, turning them inside out so that the seams wouldn't show. Through a remaining hole, the artisan would use long awls to push a whole top hat full of feathers, one by one, into the ball. It was a slow and painful process. Early craftsmen often succumbed to lung diseases caused by the feathers. The ball was then soaked overnight.
As it dried out, apparently the quill would flex and not take a permanent set, give the ball what we now know that rubber does in a ball, and that's give it compression. And that ball, that Feathery ball, was used for over 300 years.
The Feathery was a distinct advantage over anything else, but it had its problems. First, they were expensive. A skilled Feathery maker averaged only 5 a day, although Alan Robertson was said to have produced 2,500 in a single year. They sold for up to 3 shillings apiece, or more than $6 apiece at today's rate. Featheries were also inconsistent. They seldom kept their shape in damp ground, rolled oddly, and a solid hit could explode them in a burst of flying feathers. The end for Featheries was indirectly brought about by the Hindu god Vishnu. A statue of Vishnu was sent from India to Scotland, packed in a substance called gutta percha, a rubber-like resin from the Malayan sapodilla trees. A young seminarian at St. Andrews named Robert Patterson had a flash of inspiration. Boiling the gutta percha to remove any air bubbles, he molded the substance into a ball, painted it, and the gutta percha golf ball was born. Gutties, as they came to be known, were cheaper to make and carried a longer distance and were more accurate. Yet driving a gutty felt like hitting a rock. It wasn't until a few insightful caddies noticed that the balls flew better at the end of the day than at the beginning that an important lesson in aerodynamics was learned. The scars and grooves caused by the clubs made the gutties fly straighter. Soon, gutty makers hammered, then molded grooved patterns as the precursor to today's dimpled balls. The loudest objections to the gutty ball came from the Feathery maker. Alan Robertson claimed they were nay golf. And when Tom Morris was caught practicing with gutties, Robertson had his young apprentice fired. In a strategy worthy of the finest robber barons, Robertson and major Feathery makers attempted to buy up all the gutta-percha balls and destroy them. But demand for the better flying gutty was too strong. When Robertson noticed how his own game improved with the gutty, he switched sides and became a master with a new ball. The Feathery ball was all but doomed. After being fired for his appreciation of the gutty, Tom Morris accepted a post at Prestwick, where he continued to make Featheries for 2 more years. Over time, his reputation as a golfer grew, and he defeated the game's finest players. Old Tom, as he came to be known, soon surpassed his master to become the great old man of golf. J.H. Taylor, winner of 5 British Opens between 1894 and 1913, talks about his friend and golfing companion.
Tom Morris was the father of the golf professionals, an old friend of mine of St. Andrews. He was the recognized leader of professional golf in those days, and a very dear old man he was, a very delightful old man. I couldn't enlarge on what Tom Morris said. Dinna hurry the swing, keep your eye on the ball.
An excellent strokesman, Morris, like many early golfers, was also known to be a notoriously poor putter. The story goes that a postman once delivered a letter directly to Morris. The letter was addressed only to the misser of short putts, Prestwick. Tom Morris was a world-class club and ball maker, and he passed his craftsman skills on to his son, James. Yet many would say Tom Morris' greatest contribution to the game was conceived not on the fairway at all. His other son, the young Tom Morris. As vast as his father's reputation had become, young Tom Morris virtually eclipsed it by the time he reached 20 years old. His aggressive style added a new vitality to the ancient game. Tommy developed a completely new swing, which put more emphasis on the follow-through, a strategy many of today's players still rely on. Young Tom Morris was destined to become golf's first professional superstar. Even his father had to admit, "I could cope wi' Alan myself, but never wi' Tommy." Today, old Tom Morris and young Tom Morris are the only father and son represented in the PGA World Golf Hall of Fame. Together, they claimed a total of 8 championships in golf's first great event, the British Open. Alan Robertson became the first man ever to break 80 on the old course at St. Andrews. This remarkable achievement earned him the reputation as golf's greatest professional. Robertson's death in 1858 left golf without an overall champion. To settle the matter, the first great championship was held in 1860, the British Open.
The first 12 British Opens were held at Old Prestwick. St. Andrews is so much in the forefront of everybody's mind that they seem to think that St. Andrews was the very early, they held the very early tournaments, but Old Prestwick held the first 12, and then it went to St. Andrews. And then it went on a rota of maybe 5 or 6 clubs as it does today.
The Earl of Eglinton donated a red and silver Moroccan belt as the championship prize. Anyone who would win the Open 3 years in a row would gain permanent possession of the belt. Although an amateur event was held at St. Andrews in 1858, the Open would determine the world's greatest player, either amateur or professional. Only 8 men entered the first British Open, all professionals. They played 3 rounds on Prestwick's 12-hole course. In the end,
Woolley Park emerged as the champion, with Tom Morris a close second. The two would alternate championships, each winning a total of 4 until 1868. That was the year the young Tom Morris entered the Open at the ripe old age of 17. From that point on, the British Open was young Tommy's game. He won in 1868, 69, and 1870, gaining the 3 successive wins needed to gain permanent ownership of the belt.
The following year, there was actually no Open Championship played in 1871, I think it was. And in 1872, the present claret jug came in.
In 1872, young Tommy won again, equaling his father's 4 Open victories and setting a record of successive wins that has never been equaled. Golf would also play a part in the tragic end of young Tom Morris. During a tournament in Wales, Tommy was told his wife of less than a year had gone into labor and was gravely ill. By the time he reached home, both his young wife and unborn child had died. Tommy never forgave himself for not being at his wife's side during her final hours. On Christmas morning of that same year, young Tom Morris died when an artery burst in his lung. He was 24 years old. The inscription on young Tom's grave reads, "In memory of Tommy, son of Thomas Morris, deeply regretted by numerous friends and all golfers. He thrice in succession won the champion's belt and held it without rivalry and yet without envy, his many amiable qualities being no less acknowledged than his golfing achievements."
Young Tommy Morris has been an idol of mine. I would have loved to watch that young person.
By the 17th century, the European powers had expanded their influence around the globe. It seemed that wherever British troops or citizens landed, a game of golf would soon follow. Players took to the tees in Calcutta, Bombay, Rangoon, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Java, Bangkok, China, Japan, and of course the American colonies. As far back as 1659, Dutch settlers in New York passed a law against playing golf in the streets. Golfers with more power than accuracy had broken too many windows. By the time of the Revolutionary War, golf equipment began to appear in newspaper advertisements and in the wills of prominent Americans across the 13 original states. The Savannah Golf Club issued a printed invitation in the year 1811, but the location of the very first golf course in this country is still a matter of some dispute. Some say the first legitimate course in America was at White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. This house belonged to General Ulysses S. Grant and is said to have been built overlooking the links, yet little remains of that early course. As America swaggered and bled its way through a devastating civil war, golf's popularity faded. A new game captured the attention of a nation: Abner Doubleday's baseball. In fact, golf in the U.S. might have disappeared completely if not for the intervention of a familiar name, Old Tom Morris. In 1887, a Scottish-born American named Robert Lockhart ordered a set of Old Tom's finest clubs and balls to be shipped to America. The 6 clubs cost less than $2.50 apiece. After a few practice swings in a New York meadow, Lockhart forwarded the clubs to his friend, John Reed. John Reed was born near the Musselburgh Links in Scotland. Because of his heritage, the golf clubs crafted by Old Tom Morris were like a second chance at childhood. So on Washington's birthday, 1888, Reed and a few friends laid out 3 holes in a cow pasture near his home in Yonkers. In that small field, an American obsession was born. While neighbors eyed them dubiously, the enthusiastic players quickly spread the gospel of golf. Soon more clubs and balls arrived from Scotland, and more players joined the game. On November 14th, 1888, Reed hosted a special dinner for Henry Talmadge, Harry Holbrook, John Upham, and Kingman Putnam. Together, they formed the first permanent golf club in America. They named it the St. Andrews Golf Club, in honor of the ancient Scottish course.
When city planners chose to put a road right through the middle of their golf course, the annoyed St. Andrews golfers relocated to an apple orchard 4 blocks away. A huge gnarled tree grew behind the first tee, on which players hung their jackets, their bottles, and other baggage. This outdoor locker eventually inspired the group's nickname, the Apple Tree Gang.
Over the next few decades, the club would move 2 more times to a 9-hole course in Gray Oaks, which was rumored to have a haunted clubhouse, and finally to an 18-hole course near Mount Hope, where they remain today.
When I first went to America, I went down to a course which was more like a cabbage patch than anything else. It was founded by a group of Scottish golfers who called this cabbage patch St. Andrews. Well, seeing that I know St. Andrews so well and won my 2 championships there, well, I thought that was maligning St. Andrews.
Despite Taylor's obvious British bias, John Reed became the father of American golf. St. Andrews' example inspired many others. Men like Colonel John Gillespie of Sarasota and Scotsman Alex Findlay and John Duncan Dunn constructed courses along the Florida coast as the American golf boom began. In the last decade of the 19th century, America was on the move. Prosperity was in the air, sparked by the inventions of Thomas Edison, the taming of the Wild West, and the flexing of newfound industrial muscle. With the advent of the gay 90s, Americans were looking for a more civilized sport, and golf was the perfect choice. Reed's Apple Tree Gang became the subject of numerous articles as golf fever began to spread. In 1890, Reed's 6-hole orchard was one of only a handful of golf courses in the United States. By the turn of the century, there would be over 1,000, including the first public course in Van Cortlandt Park, New York. Although there was some controversy, Willie Davis is now credited with designing the first golf course at Shinnecock Hills, Long Island. Shinnecock also boasted a clubhouse by noted architect Stanford White. Meanwhile, the Newport Golf Club in Newport, Rhode Island, brought the sport to some of America's wealthiest citizens. In Massachusetts, Lawrence Curtis convinced the Country Club of Brookline to spend $50 to construct a 9-hole golf course. The most flamboyant figure in the early days of American golf was Charles Blair MacDonald, whose ability to dominate a golf course was matched only by his talent for intimidating everyone he chose. In 1893, MacDonald built America's first 18-hole course in Chicago, then designed the country's first world-class course at Wheaton. So imposing a figure was Charlie MacDonald that he actually overturned the legitimacy of the first 2 national amateur championships, simply because he didn't win. When W.G. Lawrence won America's first amateur competition in 1894, MacDonald declared the Newport tournament a sham. Championships, he declared, should be match play, not stroke play. The fact that he shot a dismal 100 on the second round was apparently not an issue. When the St. Andrews Golf Club took his advice and offered a match play competition, MacDonald was so sure of victory that he drank champagne all night. Desperately hungover, he lost in the final round to Lawrence Stoddard. Again, MacDonald complained. He said any tournament that allowed men like Stoddard to win could not be considered a legitimate championship. So many regarded him as the nation's finest player that they willingly accepted his arguments. MacDonald's ability to dismiss tournaments threw the fledgling American golf world into confusion. In response, Henry Talbinge of St. Andrews, Lawrence Curtis of Brookline, and Theodore Havemeyer of Newport called together representatives of the major clubs to plan a strategy of rules and organizations. This was the beginning of what would eventually become the United States Golf Association. Havemeyer, a multi-millionaire sugar tycoon, was elected president. and donated a $1,000 trophy for the amateur championship to again be held at Newport. When McDonald finally won his third attempt at a championship title in 1895, he generously declared this competition legitimate. As a result, C.B. McDonald has gone down in history as the first amateur champion of the United States. Yet for all his bluster, Charlie McDonald played a crucial role in the growth of golf in America. The courses he designed set a new standard of excellence. And without his antics, the USGA, America's official rule-making organization, might never have been formed. The success of the U.S. Amateur in 1895 was followed by the first U.S. Open later that year. The Open was also held at Newport.
A few months earlier, Willie Park Jr., as tough a competitor as his father and that year's British Open winner, had been on an exhibition tour of the United States. However, Park chose not to stay for the new U.S. Open and missed an opportunity to be history's first holder of both championship titles. The title went instead to 19-year-old Horace Rawlins, who became America's first champion by defeating the still formidable Willie Dunn. As well as being the first winner, Rawlins remains one of the youngest players to ever capture the Open title.
While the U.S. Open was newly born, the British Open was already 35 years old. Ever since Mary, Queen of Scots, women have displayed a unique affinity for golf. On March 30th, 1889, John Reed's St. Andrews Club recorded the first mixed foursome, breaking the gender barrier in American golf, and other clubs soon followed. Back at the original St. Andrews in Scotland, women were still restricted on the course. In addition to the men's amateur and the Open, 1895 also saw the first women's amateur competition in the United States. A year earlier, Lady Margaret Scott had won the first Ladies Golf Union Championship in Britain. The Ladies Golf Union was formed in 1893. The same year, a New Jersey course was the first to be designated for women only. Lady Margaret won the championship 3 times in a row before politely retiring from competitive golf. In America, it was Mrs. Charles S. Brown who captured the women's amateur with 132 strokes. Unlike men, who had come to realize that elaborate costumes restricted their playing ability, women wore floor-length skirts, huge sleeves or jackets, high starched collars, stiff hats, and tight corsets. On windy days, a special undergarment was employed to keep petticoats discreetly in place. It is a sign of their talent that women golfers could score as well as they did with these clothing limitations. Golf's appeal as a civilized sport with royal lineage made it the perfect activity for turn-of-the-century ladies. Women proved that proficiency with a club was no longer a byproduct of gender. At last, there was a sport where women could be both ladylike and fiercely competitive. There was no better example of this grace and determination than Beatrix Hoyt, an American teenager who would dominate the women's amateur from 1896 through 1901. Beatrix was taught by none other than Willie Dunn, the Scottish-born pro who had become an American citizen. Like Lady Margaret, Beatrix Hoyt retired after winning 3 straight championships at the ripe old age of 21. Decades before women would win the right to vote, they continued to exert a dynamic presence on the golf course. There would be great women's matchups ahead. Just as the gutta-percha ball overtook the Feathery, it wasn't long before American technology would make gutties obsolete. A young golfer named Coburn Haskell visited a friend at the B.F. Goodrich Company in Akron, Ohio. As he walked through the factory, he caught sight of a pile of thin rubber strips. With his friend Bertram Work, Haskell conceived of a new golf ball design using rubber strips wrapped around a wound core and covered with gutta-percha. The patented Haskells flew so much further that an average player could add 20 yards with the new ball. Unlike the rock-hard Gutties, Haskells didn't jar the grip upon impact. The softer impact meant that the heavily swathed club handles could be trimmed, offering a greater degree of control. Yet British players dubbed the new ball the Bounding Billy because of the way it ducked in flight and ran wildly along the green. By the time the gutta percha cover was replaced with balata and deeper dimples were added to the basic design, the rubber core ball had convinced its sternest critics. Even as golf was beginning to take hold in the United States, British golfers were reaping the benefits of centuries of fine-tuning. On the amateur scene, John Ball won an open and amazing 8 amateur championships, making him the greatest British amateur in history. Horace Hutchinson and Harold Hilton passed the British title back and forth between them. Not only did Hilton capture 2 British Opens and 4 British amateurs, he also became the only British golfer to win a U.S. amateur crown. Both Hilton and Hutchinson helped to popularize the sport in books, magazines, and newspapers. But it was on the professional scene that British golf had reached a new golden age. 3 master shot makers, J.H. Taylor, James Braid, and Harry Vardon would revolutionize the game, each with a style all his own. The first to hit the scene was John H. Taylor, a stocky Englishman who helped break Scotland's virtual monopoly on the Open in 1894. J.H.'s aggressive style of play was matched by his fiery temper. Taylor's short swing and flat-footed stance was devastatingly effective in moving the ball to the green. His accuracy carried him to 5 British Open championships, a distinction matched at that time only by James Braid and surpassed only by rival Harry Vardon's 6 wins. J.H. Taylor was born in poverty in Devon, England. In this rare interview with British star Henry Cotton, a 90-year-old J.H. recalls his initiation to the sport.
I started at the tender age of 8 years. I remember the first gentleman that ever I carried for was a real Tartar, a certain Major Hopkins, and I happened to lose a ball for him, and I was promptly fined 3d. I had to take home my poor widowed mother 3d. That was the first caddy job that ever I had. The caddies in the old days were very badly paid, you know. We only used to get 6d per round, 18 holes, only 6d.
Because he could not afford lessons, he copied the swings of the players he saw.
I only had 3 clubs then. I couldn't afford any more. A spoon, iron, and a putter. The only 3 clubs I had when I first started the game of golf.
Taylor's hard-earned talent could not be ignored, and he eventually earned a position as a golf pro and groundskeeper.
1894. That was my first Open, 1894. I'd made a sort of reputation for myself, seeing that I'd beaten Hans Kirkcuddy. So when I got to Sandwich, every Scotch professional wanted to have a go at me, you see. I took them on one after another, and I beat the whole lot of them.
Taylor continued winning tournaments over the next 2 decades. He won his 5th British Open in 1914 at the age of 43. The second star of what the Victorian press dubbed the Great Triumvirate was a tall and lanky Scotsman named James Braid. Braid was born in Earlsferry on the Fifeshire coast, a place where golf's roots ran deep. Caddying provided a few extra pennies as well as the opportunity to watch experienced players in action. Like Taylor and Harry Vardon, Braid was self-taught, learning by observation and experimentation, and it paid off. The young man dueled J.H. Taylor to a draw in an 1895 exhibition match, then went on to win the British Open 5 times between 1901 and 1910. On the links, James Braid was the epitome of composure. He seldom became agitated, even when confronted with a particularly bad piece of luck. His steady play in the face of adversity made him a winner with the fans. Yet for all his skill at driving the ball, Braid was frequently humbled by the putting green, or as humble as a 5-time British Open champion could ever be. The third and most famous member of Britain's great triumvirate was the legendary Harry Vardon, a golfer so skilled that he was eclipsed only by the multitude of legends about his shot-making ability. Mention his name to J.H. Taylor, one of the big three.
Harry Vardon, in my humble judgment, is the finest golfer that ever I saw, and I've seen a good many. His particular talent was his amazing steadiness and the finished way he played every shot.
Vardon had enormous hands, which helped him position shots with amazing consistency. Like Taylor and Braid, Vardon never took a lesson on the proper way to wield a club. As a young caddy, Vardon studied the swings of various players, then copied those he believed were the most effective. Because he couldn't afford clubs, he and his friends fashioned their own out of sticks and chunks of wood. With his handmade creations, he became comfortable with shorter and lighter clubs than any other golfers of the day. Vardon is credited with developing the overlapping grip, although a few golfers had used it in that period.
I was always rather disappointed to think that they didn't call it the J.H. Taylor grip. I never remember gripping the club any different from that. Never in all my life, ever since I was a caddy. But I wouldn't deprive my old friend Harry Vardon of the honour of being the first, if you like, of introducing what is known now as the Vardon grip.
One can see he employed an open stance, aiming at his target and slashing the air with a sweeping backswing. So effective was this new style of play that Vardon is often called the father of modern technique. In this demonstration footage, Vardon shows how to perform a unique shot. In the age of the stymie, where one was blocked by the ball of an opponent, ways had to be devised to get around the stymie in order to reach the cup. If the rule ever comes back, here's how you do it. Harry Vardon's seemingly effortless technique carried him through 14 tournament victories in a row. In stiff competition against powerhouse players such as Braid, Taylor, and later Ted Ray, Harry Vardon still managed to win an incredible 6 British Opens, a feat no other golfer has ever been able to duplicate. Word of his ability spread across the sea when in 1900, A.G. Spaulding commissioned Vardon to undertake an American tour to promote the company's Vardon Flyer Gutty Ball. Even before he stepped off the boat, Harry Vardon had aroused the unbridled excitement of American golf enthusiasts. He won match after match, beating the best the States had to offer.
He became the first non-American to win the U.S. Open, held that year at Wheaton, Illinois.
But the American tour would cost Vardon dearly. Clearly exhausted, he became sidelined with tuberculosis. It would take 5 years of forced relaxation to recover from the disease. The man who began under the watchful eye of old Tom Morris would regain his championship form to create a standard of consistent excellence by which professional golfers are measured even today.
The transition from the 19th to the 20th century was a time of exciting change tempered with ominous signs of dangers ahead. European nations snatched up colonies in a mad dash towards world war. Sigmund Freud turned the Victorian world upside down with his theories of sexuality and the subconscious mind. Railways cut across Africa, and early automobiles chugged along in noisy promise of American prosperity and optimism. The sports world at this time was alive with excitement. The ancient Olympic Games had been recently revived, with the first modern games held in Athens in 1896.
In America, baseball was rapidly becoming the national pastime, more than 60 years after Abner Doubleday laid out his first diamond. The first World Series was held in 1903, and the Boston Red Sox captured the sport's highest honor. By 1900, basketball was less than 10 years old. Golf courses were springing up throughout the world, from less than 400 in 1890 to more than 2,000 by the turn of the century. Britain still ruled the sport, while American companies had taken the lead in equipment technology, exporting 500,000 bounding billies a year. Golf had also made great inroads in American society, extending its influence to literature, art, music, and language. A bounder was someone who flouted convention, like those who used the bounding billies. Despite golf's growing appeal, amateur players sprang predominantly from the ranks of the rich and well-educated. Wealthy industrialists took to golf with a passion. Steel tycoon Andrew Carnegie built a small home on the grounds of John Reed's St. Andrew's course and personally signed for the $50,000 mortgage on the clubhouse. J.D. Rockefeller built a small course on the grounds of his estate and employed professionals to coach him throughout the year. On the day he broke 50 for his 9-hole course, he donated $5 million to charity. Some believe Rockefeller was the first to discuss high-level business deals on the golf course. As it entered its 6th century, the ancient game of golf could not resist the winds of change. A new order was rapidly approaching, one that would challenge British invincibility in the sport they created so long ago. The U.S. amateur title had, throughout its short history, never left the States. From these defiant ranks rose a quiet champion who challenged British sovereignty over the sport. Walter J. Travis was an Australian turned American citizen. A consummate tennis player, Travis played his first round of golf at the advanced age of 36. This late start earned him the nickname of Old Man Travis. Travis was one of the first players to stress the importance of putting. His was a studious approach to the game. In fact, he was frequently referred to as a cold fish. Walter Travis won the U.S. Amateur in 1900, only 3 years after he first picked up a club. He repeated his victory in 1901. Old Man Travis decided it was time to challenge the lords of golf on their own grounds. In 1904, he crossed the Atlantic to compete in the British Amateur. Travis' American citizenship and aloof manner put him at odds with the British fans and press. When his shot-making ability suddenly failed him just before the tournament, Travis exchanged his favorite club for a center-shafted putter made in New York. It was called a Schenectady. His confidence renewed, Travis sliced through the competition to the final round. When the American missed a putt on the 6th hole, cheering broke out in the British gallery. This insult, coupled with a pitifully cross-eyed caddy, only increased the old man's determination. He went on to win the match 4-3. For the first time in history, the championship cup had been taken from its native land. It wasn't long before the royal and ancient banned center-shafted putters in tournament play, a rule that would stand until 1952. But despite all the controversy, Walter Travis and his Schenectady had at last breached Britain's domination of the sport and set the stage for great players to follow. Another impressive amateur was Jerry Travers, who grew up on a large estate driving golf balls down his front lawn. As a youth, he received lessons in the art of shot making from two-time Open champion Alex Smith. At 17, Jerry Travers beat Old Man Travis at the Nassau Invitational, the first shot in a rivalry that would last nearly a decade. Jerry Travers became the first player to win 4 amateur championships. In 1915, he added a U.S. Open title to his record. Travers' life off the course was far less successful. Reckless spending and the stock market crash of 1929 left him near poverty. Yet his 5 championship victories earned him a place of honor in golf's history. American and British amateurs had captured the imagination of the public. The professionals of the time generated far less excitement. Most pros were working-class Brits and were looked upon as outsiders. The U.S. Open always attracted smaller crowds than the amateur matches. Even those with championship talent could not always find acceptance. Consider the case of Willie Anderson. Anderson was born in Scotland in 1880 and moved to the States when he was 14. His smoldering moodiness erupted in flashes of brilliance on the golf course. Willie Anderson captured his first U.S. Open in 1901, then added victories in 1903, 1904, and 1905. But there was little glory for this 4-time national champion. Depression and alcoholism soon took its toll on Anderson's career. The only man to ever win the U.S. Open 3 times in a row died virtually ignored at the age of 34.
The first American-born professional to capture the U.S. Open was Johnny McDermott. He was a religious young man. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, and attended church regularly.
As a brash 19-year-old, he won the 1911 U.S. Open. After he retained the title in 1912, McDermott sailed to Britain to duplicate the heroism of Old Man Travis by being the first American to win the British Open. He didn't even qualify. The next year, he placed 5th, the highest an American had scored up to that point. Unfortunately, McDermott never reached his goal of capturing the British Open. In 1914, a deep depression afflicted the young champion. He spent the next 57 years in rest homes and sanatoriums until his death in 1972. By the close of the 19th century, editors began to realize that golf had all the right ingredients for dramatic copy. A grim and solitary hero doing battle with the forces of nature. Major newspapers on both sides of the ocean helped spur reader excitement by covering championship matches and international tours. The London Times had covered the British Open since its inception in 1860. Harry Vardon's U.S. tour in 1900 made every major newspaper, from Boston to Chicago. Many early writers on the sport were golfers themselves. One of the most prolific was Horace Hutchinson, 1887 British amateur champion. Hutchinson authored books, articles, and essays on the major players of his day. Bernard Darwin, whose grandfather wrote The Origin of the Species, was golf's most celebrated writer. His passion for the sport extended to his impressive playing ability. Darwin spent more than half a century detailing the evolution of golf for a variety of publications. The turn of the century saw the birth of magazines specifically dealing with golf. This was proof that golf had become a phenomenon and not merely a fad. Old Man Travis founded an upscale magazine called The American Golfer, which he also served as editor. Grantland Rice, a noteworthy author in his own right, took over as the editor after Travis' death in 1927. It would not be long before radio and film would discover golf and travel the courses of the world to report on the action. Arnaud Massy, a popular French golfer, became the first non-national to win the British Open in 1907. Still, Britain's great triumvirate continued to dominate. And with 1902 Open winner Sandy Hurd, they became a fearsome foursome. Hurd won the Open with a Haskell ball from America, striking the final blow to the disappearing Gutty. To supplement this already impressive team came a new power hitter from Britain named Ted Ray. The history of golf at the country club in Brookline, Massachusetts, dates from 1893. However, it wasn't until 20 years later, during the U.S. Open of 1913, that history was carved on its rolling fairways. That Open, scheduled to take advantage of the availability of two of the world's most prominent golfers. Harry Vardon, who by this time had won the British Open 5 times and the U.S. Open in 1900. And Ted Ray, winner of the 1912 British Open. In addition, the field of 168 included many other well-known golfers of the time. Greats from both sides of the Atlantic gathered for the qualifying rounds that week in September. Wilfred Reed came from Great Britain. Alec Ross from the United States. Also a newcomer to the professional ranks, Walter Hagen, who was playing in his first United States Open and was reported to have announced upon arrival, "I'm here to help you boys with Vardon and Ray." Jerry Travers had just won the United States Amateur Championship for the 2nd time in succession. Along the way, he defeated a little-known amateur and former caddy, Francis Ouimet. Francis grew up in this house across the street from the country club. After the loss to Travers, Robert Watson, the president of the USGA, spoke to Francis.
The way I got into the championship was rather remarkable. I'd been playing the amateur championship at Garden City, and as I was leaving Garden City, having been beaten by Jerome Travers, the title holder, the president of the USGA asked me if I would not like to play in the Open Championship. And I said, "I haven't given it a thought, Mr. Watson." Well, he said, "Give me $5 and you're in." So that's how I happened to enter the Open Championship in 1913.
These rare scenes were recorded on the 50th anniversary of the 1913 U.S. Open. Francis recalled the weather and the competition as he walked the course with sportscaster Fred Cusick.
We had 2 qualifying rounds on Tuesday and Wednesday. The weather was fine. On Thursday, it was quite good for the first 2 rounds of the championship. But Friday, when we had to play 2 rounds again, the 3rd and 4th rounds, it was very bad. It rained all day long. Everybody was keen to see Vardon and Ray. They were regarded as the 2 best in the world. Vardon was a picture player. He had a beautiful swing, beautifully balanced. Ray was a huge man and a rather awkward player, but a very effective one.
In the 4th and final round of regulation play, Francis knew that he needed a birdie and a par to tie Vardon and Ray, who had both finished at 304 for their totals. As he approaches the 17th hole, he describes how it played back in 1913.
The old green was located to the left of that mound in that general direction. It was a slanting green. It ran from right to left. It was protected by a trap in front and some mounds on the right. But I got my second shot on the green in a good position, maybe 15 feet from the hole, and I was lucky enough to hold that putt for that 3 that I needed so badly. They said that there was quite a commotion caused by cars on the street and the gallery, but I was concentrating so seriously and so vigorously that I didn't hear anything.
You still, of course, had to play the 18th.
I needed to afford a tie.
And was that fairly uneventful, or how did you feel about
Well, it was not altogether uneventful. I thought I had a great second shot there. But when I got up to the ball, I found it had hit the top of the mound, and instead of kicking forward, it stopped right there. And I finally had to chip up about 3 feet from the hole and was lucky enough to get that putt.
And that putt gave him a 4-round total of 304. Now he headed into the playoff. There was, however, a brief stop while a golfer friend of his offered to carry his bag for the playoff. Then when Francis saw tears in the eyes of his caddy, young Eddie Lowry, he told his friend that Eddie would still carry the bag. Let's pick up the story of the playoff on the 13th hole.
It was anybody's match for 13 holes. At the end of 13 holes, I was leading by 1 stroke. Varden came next. He was a stroke away from me, and Ray was 2 strokes away. So anything could have happened in those last 5 holes. But on the 15th hole, Ray sliced his tee shot into the rough, put his second shot into a trap, took 2 to get out, and took a 6 on the hole to our 4s. So that put him 4 shots behind me and 3 behind Varden, and put him practically out of the running.
The 17th was a pivotal hole right here as we stand on it.
Varden had the honor by virtue of having made a 3 on the 13th, and since the other holes, the following holes had been tied, he still retained the honor playing the 17th hole. And he hit a ball to the left, dangerously close to a trap. I couldn't tell whether it was in a trap or not, but I didn't want to take that line.
Right.
So I hit my ball where I had driven it the day before, well to the right, to the right-hand side of the fairway. And when we got down to our balls, his ball was in the trap, which has been known ever since as the Varden trap. And that trap was a very difficult trap to play out of. It sloped into a bank, and he was left with a downhill lie from which it was impossible to play a phenomenal recovery shot to the green. He had to play out to one side. In the meantime, I put my second shot on the green in 2. He got on in 3, and I had quite an edge then, particularly when a 15 or an 18-foot putt dribbled into the hole for a 3.
Francis Ouimet went on to take a 4 on the 18th hole for a total of 72 strokes, and went on to defeat Harry Varden, who had shot 77, and Ted Ray, who ended up with a 78. The unbelievable had happened. Varden and Ray had been defeated by an unknown amateur from the United States. Francis Ouimet's skill on that rainy day in Brookline would change the game of golf in the eyes of the American public. It would also signal the end of British sovereignty in golf.
How did he feel about that special moment of victory?
And it was one of those things that came out of the blue. I didn't expect to do it.
If he didn't expect to win, neither did anyone else, especially Varden and Ray. When he did, it sent a message to inspire the young caddies of the country.
The fellow I was caddying for said to me, he says, "You know, a caddy defeated Varden and Ray." I said, "Who?" "A fellow by the name of Francis Ouimet." "Oh, boy, a caddy. Well, there's a chance for us." I said, "How did he grip the club and everything?" And I copied Ouimet's interlocking grip. And Francis and I became friends for life. He was a wonderful fellow.
Francis Ouimet would go on to achieve his goal of winning the National Amateur the following year. But the story doesn't end there, as we will see later in golf's history. But no moment yet to come would transcend this one. If Francis Ouimet's victory in the 1913 U.S. Open made people sit up and take notice, Walter Hagen's antics were designed to pull them out of their chairs, slap them on the back, and make sure they enjoyed the game. 1 part style, 1 part cockiness, and a heaping portion of talent made Hagen golf's quintessential showman. The master player with a gregarious nature changed a game of determined plodding to a sport filled with recklessness and excitement. With one eye on the ball and the other on his carefully crafted public image, Hagen promoted himself with all the skill of a Madison Avenue agency, and his appetite for life was positively infectious. Like Ouimet, Hagen learned golf as a caddy. Young Walter began toting clubs at the Country Club of Rochester when he was 10, He quit school by leaping out an open window when he was 13 years old. Even then, he had no doubt he was destined for greatness. Hagen took odd jobs as everything from a taxidermist to a mandolin maker's apprentice, and anxiously awaited the day he would become a professional baseball player. All the while, Hagen the caddy was perfecting his game. When a pro position opened up at the Country Club of Rochester, Walter Hagen was the logical choice. The 20-year-old pro hopped a train to Brookline to compete in the 1913 U.S. Open. Despite the fact that this was only his second tournament, he missed the playoff with Varden, Ray, and Ouimet by just 3 strokes.
Francis Ouimet.
Walter played in that championship and might very well have won it.
A bitterly disappointed Hagen returned to the Rochester Country Club to teach golf, tennis, ice skating, and croquet to the members. Then came his big chance. Hagen tried out for the Philadelphia Nationals. Although his pitching suffered from an occasional wildness, he impressed manager Pat Moran enough to earn a chance to play the following year. But Moran warned the newcomer, no golf. Walter Hagen's dream of big league baseball was about to become a reality. The next summer, Ernest Willard, a club member and editor of the Rochester Democrat, offered to underwrite all expenses if Hagen attended the 1914 U.S. Open in Chicago. The only catch was that Hagen forget baseball and give golf a chance. It wasn't an easy decision. Could the solitary glory of golf compare with the team camaraderie and cheering crowds of baseball? It wasn't until he and his friend Dutch Leonard caught the train for Chicago that Walter Hagen made up his mind. Hagen couldn't resist doing Chicago in style. The night before the Open, he feasted on lobster and champagne. A few hours later, he was doubled over in his hotel room by a severe stomach pain. Dutch Leonard called a doctor who gave Hagen some pink pills and advised him not to play in the Open. Hagen came close to withdrawing, but Leonard prodded him into at least playing the first few holes. He could see what he felt like from then on. The next morning, a very sick Walter Hagen stumbled out to the course at Midlothian. He took one hole at a time. By the end of the round, he had broken the course record and led the field with an impressive 68, only 1 stroke ahead of the defending champion, Francis Ouimet. The contestants had to play a grueling 72 holes in 2 days. On the final round, Hagen felt well enough to ask a young woman in the gallery for a date. Hagen finished with a total score of 290. When Chick Evans missed sinking a 65-foot chip shot by 9 inches, Walter Hagen became the National Open champion. The champion quietly returned to his teaching duties at Rochester. Even though he had beaten the best in the nation, Hagen lived in a time when golfing professionals were seldom admired. It was Hagen himself who would do more to change that attitude than any other player in golf history. Many felt that Hagen had been a flash in the pan because he failed to retain his title in the 1915 Open. Jerry Travers emerged victorious, and Charles Chick Evans won in 1916. Up to that point, Chick Evans had demonstrated incredible promise and disastrous luck. His powerful tee shots were admired by professionals such as Harry Varden, who dubbed him the best amateur in the States. Evans won his first Western Amateur in 1909. And then the 1910 Western Open, shooting the first subpar score that tournament had ever seen. Yet his record of victories did not match his obvious talents. His opponents always rose to the occasion to rob him of certain victory. But in 1916, it all fell together for the affable Evans, and he became the first player to sweep both the U.S. Open and the Amateur in the same year. After his double victory, endorsement offers began pouring in. In a heartfelt discussion with his mother, Evans decided to remain an amateur and refuse the lucrative offers to turn pro. He agreed to write a book and make a series of recordings on golf. The following is from Chick Evans' original recordings.
I keep my eye on the ball. When the club head is in position, rhythm, I think, demands that it be kept in motion. This, in my case, begins with a sandpapering. A start of vibratory movement, continues into the forward press, and then passes into the stroke. Try the swing as a whole. Feel the completed rhythm, the music of the stroke. Swing up, swing down rhythmically.
The $5,000 advance in royalties from the recordings were used to start the Evans Scholarship Fund, which offered college scholarships for caddies. In this way, Chick Evans could retain his amateur standing. In 1928, the Western Golf Association agreed to administer the fund, and over the next 60 years, more than 6,000 caddies would attend college thanks to the generosity of Chick Evans. Walter Hagen, meanwhile, took a new position as the head pro at the Oakland Hills Country Club in Detroit. Despite his failure to win the 1915 and 1916 Opens, the Hague reigned supreme in the big-money social set of Detroit's auto manufacturers. His slick-back hair and daring dress were perfectly suited for the jazz era. Hagen's hearty laugh and outrageous humor made him every flapper's dream and every man's best drinking buddy. He would never be known for his consistency, but Walter Hagen was gradually crafting the skills which would transform him into one of golf's greatest players. (1916) was the year that golf professionals throughout the United States took an active role in overturning the discrimination against them. Although amateurs were treated like gentlemen, professionals were often looked down on for trying to make a living at the sport. Amateurs could eat and change in the clubs. Professionals were not allowed past the front door. To counter this image, millionaire retailer Rodman Wanamaker invited leading professionals to a luncheon where they decided to form the PGA, or Professional Golfers Association of America. A similar British organization had been formed in 1901 with J.H. Taylor as the president. The PGA of America was devoted to helping the thousands of teaching professionals who gave lessons and sold golf merchandise in country clubs throughout the nation. The goal of the PGA was to raise the standards of the profession by increasing income, sharing knowledge, and providing new tournaments for professionals to compete. The Professional Golfer of America magazine helped club pros learn more about teaching and equipment than just what the previous pro had taught them. The PGA also negotiated with manufacturers to create exclusive lines of equipment for club pro shops. No longer would a teaching pro have to supplement his income by making clubs or balls, as they did in the 1850s, or with part-time work as a stonemason or carpenter, which was common at the turn of the century. The PGA of America helped make professional golf a viable career, but it was the sheer audacity and charisma of Walter Hagen that would give it flash and respectability. The first PGA Championship tournament was held in 1916. The winner was Jim Barnes, a lanky golfer who stood 6'4", an imposing stature that earned him the nickname Long Jim Barnes. First prize for the championship was $500, a medal set with diamonds, and temporary possession of a silver cup donated by Rodman Wanamaker. Wanamaker's support for professional golf was bolstered by his love for the game. The PGA Championship was an immediate success, providing new opportunities and greater recognition to some of the best players of the day. Jim Barnes repeated his premier victory with a second PGA Championship in 1919. The man in white is President of the United States, Warren G. Harding, presenting the 1921 U.S. Open trophy to Barnes. To the right stands Jock Hutchison, a Scottish-born golfer who became the first American citizen to win the British Open. Despite its initial success, the PGA Championship was canceled in 1917 and 1918 as America became a participant in what was optimistically called the war to end all wars.